Our top stories here on Sky News this afternoon. A witness has told the Oscar Pistorius trial she heard blood-curdling screams from a woman and then 4 gunshots. The Prime Minister is chairing a National Security Council meeting on the Ukraine crisis. And the army has apologised after a female soldier killed herself following rape allegations. Well, in the last hour, the Russian news agency Interfax has quoted a Ukrainian defence source as saying that they've been given until 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, UK time, to surrender to Moscow or face some consequences. So the big question is, what is it that President Putin wants and what are the chances of him succeeding? Well, here with me is our Foreign Affairs editor, Sam Kiley. First of all, to this news that we're getting via the Interfax news agency suggesting some kind of deadline may have been set, the Ukrainian forces to surrender or face consequences. What do you make of that?
Well, the statement says, Anna, if they do not surrender before 5 a.m. tomorrow, a real assault will be started against units and divisions of the armed forces across Crimea. So this is an ultimatum, if it's true, that drastically ups the ante in the Crimea. I frankly don't see that it makes any sense from the Russian perspective. They have had a bloodless takeover of the Crimea. This is now suggesting that the forces within the Crimea hand themselves over, surrender to Russian control, rather than, for example, be allowed to gracefully withdraw, if they so choose, to the rest of the Ukraine, which is where their loyalties most likely lie, if they're not part of the pro-Russian elements that have already switched sides. The Ukrainian Navy is co-located, is in the same port of Sebastopol. That's where its headquarters is, with Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Now, it's the Black Sea Fleet and the commandos from that fleet that have taken over much of the Ukraine. So it's very strange that this demand for surrender may have come, unless there are a few ships from the Ukrainian Navy that have made it out, or that the Russians have intelligence that they're facing some kind of counterattack and they're trying to move that much more quickly.
And as yet, of course, no confirmation that this is true, that this is the case. But if it were, what does it tell us ultimately? And what have we learned over the last few days about President Putin's ultimate ambitions here?
Well, what we've learned, above all, is that Kiev is under pressure, quite understandably, from the West and internally. This is the central government, not to make any precipitous moves, not to inflame tensions, because that could result in an excuse for Russia to do more. Now, if we just take a look at the map here of the region, if I draw this line here, broadly speaking, that line there to the east of it is either a Russian majority linguistically or a pro-Russian culturally. That is an area that, and pretty much along that white line there, that is going to be the fault line between the Kiev central government and Russian interests. Now, the Kremlin should not be given the opportunity to move in, to send troops in to eastern Ukraine, to rescue the populations there that may be complaining of coming under pressure. And it's this sort of pressure, albeit generated, if it's true, by Russia, but violence involving people of Russian ethnicity who speak Russian as a mother tongue, is very, very dangerous. And if we look a bit closer down to the Caucasus, I'd explain why. Because if we go in a little bit closer, we can now see the Georgian provinces there of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Those are 2 provinces that are still technically part of Georgia. Both have significant Russian populations. The Russians moved into those areas under the guise of protecting ethnic Russians who were, in their view, being oppressed by the authorities out of the Georgian capital, Tbilisi. In 2008, the Georgian government tried to retake South Ossetia from Russian dominance and lost a 5-day war, leaving those 2 areas marked in green, effectively part of Russia, a return, if you like, to a micro bit of the Soviet Union. And what that will mean is that for the Ukrainian government in Kiev, they have to do everything they possibly can to avoid an escalation of violence in the region. So if we've got a threat of violence now coming from the Black Sea Fleet, coming from the Kremlin, that could trigger the sorts of events that we've seen now in Donetsk, another eastern province dominated by Russian speakers, where people have moved into the local parliament there. So
Okay.
it's a dangerous precedent.
Okay, Sam, yes, thank you. Well, let's get more on this and get some reaction now. Elena Korosteleva is director of the Global Europe Centre at the University of Kent, and she joins us now live. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us. In your view, what is Russia trying to achieve by moving into Crimea?
Pleasure. Well, it is relatively straightforward. After all, Russia has historically had a particular influence and always considered Ukraine and all the other former socialist republics as its particular special area of interests. And that's what Russia is trying to do now, is trying to restore leverage and to ensure that Ukraine or parts of Ukraine continue to be under the control of Russia.
You talk about Crimea and other parts of Ukraine. Do you think its ambitions extend beyond Crimea?
Well, the tactics that Russia is currently deploying is obviously resembling the situation of 2008, for example, of the war that happened in Georgia, but also what had been going on and still continue actually in Transnistria, the Republic of Moldova. Basically, Russia is currently trying to exert as much influence as possible in order to keep Ukraine under its guidance and control. And Crimea is particularly vital for Russian interests, obviously, because of the fleet and the naval forces that are currently located there.
I mean, how simple, how likely is it for Russia to succeed in simply getting Crimea annexed?
Well, this what really the international society must not allow to happen, because after all that would set very dangerous precedent across, well, not only across the former Soviet Union but also across the globe. Because, well, first of all, there could be severe implications for the former Soviet space. I've already mentioned Transnistria with its large Russian population, Russian-speaking population, but I also mentioned the Caucasus. You already mentioned in your program Abkhazia, you also mentioned South Ossetia. So therefore, Russia should be stopped from actually pursuing its strategy of humanitarian strategy of protecting, for example, the so-called rights of Russian-speaking population. And also it would destabilize the order, the international order altogether, because after all, we're talking about the credibility of international system, of international governance in place. We know that, for example, Ukraine became part of non-proliferation treaty, and therefore, in order to guarantee that particular status, we know that US and the United Kingdom in particular, they're involved in guaranteeing peace and stability within the country, as well as Russia. But now we know that Russia somewhat invaded Crimea, having 15,000, according to my data, 15,000 troops now stationed in Crimea, having surrounded all military compounds of the Ukrainian forces. And even this morning, we have observed that there were 4 ships that arrived into the Crimean ports. So the situation is very fragile, and we should try, with all possible means, not to try and escalate it to the situation of war.
Okay, well, Elena Korosteleva, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on what's going on in Ukraine and in Crimea. Thank you very much indeed.